Why do enlightened masters refuse to explain everything? Imagine someone stepping into an art gallery. He stands before an abstract painting, gazing intently at the intricate brushstrokes filled with hidden meanings. A question echoes in his mind. What does this painting mean? He approaches the artist, expecting a clear and precise answer. But instead of explaining, the artist simply smiles and says, "Feel it for yourself." Disappointment arises. He wants a definitive answer, a logical interpretation, a specific explanation to grasp what is happening on the canvas. Yet, he does not realize that his very desire to understand through intellect has already clouded his direct experience with the artwork. Words can never replace emotions, just as a mathematical formula can never substitute for the beauty of a poem. And this is the paradox of human knowledge. We constantly crave clear answers, yet we fail to see that some things cannot be confined within conceptual boundaries. This is precisely why enlightened masters, whether it be Buddha, Lao Tzu, or Krishnamurti, have often refrained from offering absolute explanations of the ultimate truth. Not because they do not know, but because every word is a limitation. Human thinking operates within pre-existing concepts, but ultimate reality is not a concept. The moment something is defined, it is already a reduced and fragmented version of the truth. What does this imply? It means that every philosophical system, every doctrine, every teaching is a double-edged sword. They can guide individuals toward a certain level of understanding, but if one is not careful, they can also become barriers that prevent people from perceiving the truth beyond words. Thus, a critical question arises: if supreme wisdom cannot be expressed in words, if every teaching risks distortion, how can humans ever access the truth? The answer does not lie in searching for a pre-constructed system of knowledge but in how we perceive and experience reality. Enlightened masters do not withhold explanations to keep secrets, rather, they understand that the real answer cannot be transmitted, it can only be realized through direct experience. So how can one truly grasp this? What prevents people from touching the truth? And what approach can break the limitations of thought? These are the questions we will explore together. Language, a useless tool when confronting truth. Language is one of humanity's greatest inventions. It allows us to communicate, share knowledge, and build civilizations. Yet, there is a paradox that few recognize. The very tool that helps us understand the world is also the greatest barrier preventing us from perceiving its true essence. Why is this so? Imagine standing in a vast forest, dense trees, fresh air, birds singing melodiously. That experience cannot be replaced by words or written text. You could describe the forest in hundreds of pages, but those words would only be a pale shadow of the real experience. Anything expressed through language is merely a simplification of an infinitely rich reality. This is the fundamental problem of human thinking. We rely on language to understand the world. Yet this reliance limits us within rigid frameworks of thought. Language is not reality, it is just a system of symbols. The first crucial truth to understand: language does not reflect reality. It is merely a system of symbols created by humans to describe reality. Take a simple example. The word water is just a meaningless sound unless connected to a concept we have learned. A Vietnamese person calls it nook, an English speaker calls it water, and a Japanese person calls it mizu. But in reality, water itself carries no name, it is simply flowing, unrestricted by any linguistic label. But the problem does not stop there. When humans attempt to use language to describe abstract concepts, such as love, joy, suffering, or enlightenment, they are even more prone to misunderstanding. These words do not hold objective meanings but are instead shaped by individual experiences. Consider the word happiness. To a wealthy person, happiness may mean wealth and fame. To someone in love, happiness may be being with their beloved. To a spiritual seeker, happiness may be liberation from desires. A single word carries countless interpretations, each unique to the person experiencing it. No one can grasp its universal essence. And this is why when an enlightened master attempts to express truth in words, it immediately becomes a distorted version of reality. When language becomes a barrier to perception, to fully grasp the limitations of language, imagine a person who has been blind from birth. If you try to explain colors to them, what would you say? You might say, red is hot, blue is cool, but these descriptions are merely metaphors, they do not truly convey what color is. The blind person may repeat your words, may try to imagine based on other sensations, but they will never truly see color. Now, extend this problem into spirituality and consciousness. When someone asks about ultimate truth, enlightenment, or the nature of the universe, they are seeking an answer in words. But what they fail to realize is that truth cannot be confined within language, it can only be directly experienced. This is why when a Zen student asks a master, "Master, what is enlightenment?" the teacher simply smiles, raises a finger, or remains silent. To those who have never experienced direct realization, this response may seem strange or frustrating. They desire a clear answer. But those who are perceptive enough will understand. The silence itself is the answer. Any verbal explanation would only distort the true essence of enlightenment. Paradox. The more you try to understand, the less you can. The human mind is programmed to seek answers. But this very desire often becomes the biggest obstacle. Have you ever tried to remember something, only to find that the harder you try, the more it escapes you? Have you ever struggled to sleep, only to find that the more you force yourself, the more awake you become? Have you ever tried to control life, only to watch it become more chaotic? This is a well-known paradox. The most important things often arise only when we stop desperately seeking them. When you stop forcing yourself to sleep, sleep comes naturally. When you stop forcing creativity, inspiration suddenly appears. When you stop seeking truth through words, you finally experience truth directly. This is why Zen has a famous saying. Before I studied Zen, mountains were mountains, rivers were rivers. When I studied Zen, mountains were no longer mountains, rivers were no longer rivers. But when I attained enlightenment, mountains were mountains again, and rivers were rivers again. What does this mean? At the beginning, when people first acquire knowledge, they believe they understand everything. But as they go deeper, they realize that all they have known is just a surface layer. And the world appears more complex. However, if they continue to the very end, they will recognize that everything was always simple, just not in the way they originally thought. Conclusion. Truth is not in words, but in direct awareness. If there is one lesson to take away from all of this, it is, language cannot fully express the ultimate reality, it is merely a tool to describe a small fragment of the truth. The more people cling to words, the more they misunderstand and become trapped in concepts. Enlightened masters do not explain everything, not because they do not know, but because any answer given in words can become an obstacle. Truth cannot be found in books or teachings, it can only be realized through direct experience. And so, the critical question remains, if language cannot lead to truth, how can one truly understand? The answer lies in how we approach reality, not through intellect, but through direct perception. But how can one achieve this state? This is what we will explore in the next sections. The issues we are exploring are not just distant philosophical discussions but reflections of how each person thinks in their daily life. Clinging to words in search of certainty is a natural tendency, but it is also the very thing that leads people astray into illusions. That is why, on the path to self-realization, we do not merely provide information or theories. Instead, we focus on opening new perspectives, guiding you to directly experience and realize truth for yourself rather than passively absorbing knowledge. If this is your first time visiting the channel, remember, our goal is not to offer a new belief system, but to break through the mental barriers that already exist, allowing you to see reality with greater clarity. In the next section, we will delve into an important question. If language cannot touch truth, how can humans access reality? Let's explore the methods used by enlightened beings, from silence, Zen koans, to non-verbal approaches that help transcend the limitations of conventional thought. This is the key to unlocking a deeper awareness, not through intellect, but through direct experience. Let's continue this journey together. The trap of words, when misunderstanding becomes attachment. Looking back at history, we see that most of humanity's greatest philosophies fall into a dangerous trap. They begin as revolutionary insights. But over time, people turn them into rigid systems, dogmas, and even tools for controlling thought. The root of this phenomenon lies in a universal psychological trait. Humans fear uncertainty. We always want clear answers, an absolute truth to cling to, a fixed belief system to define ourselves. But this very need creates countless illusions, turning liberating wisdom into mental prisons that bind human perception. Consider the following paradoxes. Buddhism was not originally a religion. The Buddha did not establish a church, did not create a divine hierarchy, and did not impose rigid rituals. He simply pointed to a path that helps people free themselves from suffering. But as his teachings spread, they were systematized, transformed into an organized religion with hierarchies and strict rules, many of which took people further away from the original spirit of the Dharma. Lao Tzu's Taoism began as a philosophy of natural harmony, a way of flowing with the universe. But in practice, it evolved into various schools, mixed with mysticism and magic, gradually losing its original essence. Zen Buddhism originally had no fixed scriptures, no reliance on written texts. It emphasized direct realization. But over time, it too became structured, with strict principles and theoretical teachings that turned it into an intellectual pursuit rather than a method of attaining inner freedom. Where does this paradox originate? Words. A double-edged tool for understanding. When an enlightened master speaks about truth, they do not intend to turn it into a doctrine. But the problem is that people don't just listen, they interpret, rationalize, debate, and systematize it according to their pre-existing thought patterns. Take a simple example. When the Buddha spoke of anatta, non-self, he did not mean that a person does not exist, in a literal sense. He simply pointed out that the self we cling to is just a temporary collection of elements, body, emotions, thoughts, and has no fixed essence. But when this idea reached those who had not directly experienced it, they started debating. So does that mean I don't exist? If there is no self, who is living? Who is awakening? Without an ego, how do we maintain morality? From there, they constructed elaborate systems to explain the concept. And the result? A simple teaching about detachment was transformed into a complex philosophical system, trapping people in endless intellectual arguments rather than genuine realization. Similarly, when Lao Tzu said, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao," he did not mean that people should never speak of the Tao, but rather that any description of the Tao fails to capture its true essence. But instead of understanding this spirit, many people turned his words into mystical theories, creating layers of convoluted philosophy that Lao Tzu himself never intended. This reveals a profound truth. Humans are not skilled at receiving wisdom, they are only skilled at distorting it into forms they can intellectually grasp. When misunderstanding becomes attachment, one of humanity's greatest paradoxes is that we seek to understand everything through thought but fail to recognize that thought itself is the barrier to true understanding. Ask yourself, why is it so difficult for people to change their beliefs once they have committed to them? The reason is that once the mind clings to a particular idea, it automatically builds a protective barrier around that belief. When confronted with conflicting information, people do not re-evaluate. They instinctively reject anything that threatens their existing worldview. In psychology, this phenomenon is called confirmation bias. People tend to seek out and believe only the information that reinforces their existing beliefs, while dismissing or ignoring anything that challenges them. This explains why many people do not truly seek truth, they only seek validation for what they already believe. Someone who believes the world is chaotic will only see injustice and disorder. Someone devoted to a particular ideology will selectively find evidence supporting it while ignoring anything that might contradict it. Someone who idolizes a spiritual teacher will accept every word without ever personally verifying it through direct experience. This is why enlightened masters often avoid giving direct answers to metaphysical questions. If they provide a definitive answer, the listener will immediately cling to it as absolute truth, and in doing so, they stop seeking truth itself, instead becoming attached to an intellectual concept. How to avoid this trap? If words can be misunderstood, if the human mind distorts truth to fit its beliefs, then how can one approach truth without being trapped by mental constructs? The answer does not lie in accumulating more knowledge, it lies in letting go of attachment to knowledge. Do not blindly believe any theory, test it through your own experience. Do not let your thinking be confined to a fixed framework. Always question and remain open to new perspectives. Do not seek an absolute answer. Learn to embrace uncertainty and expand your perception through reality itself, rather than through abstract concepts. But how can this be practiced in daily life? In the next section, we will explore the methods used by enlightened masters to help people break free from mental conditioning and directly experience truth. Let's continue this journey together. When philosophy becomes doctrine, how words kill truth. Philosophy, in its purest form, is a journey in search of truth. Yet, throughout human history, a paradox keeps repeating itself. Ideas that once liberated the mind eventually become chains that imprison it. Why does this happen? The human mind has a peculiar tendency. We turn free-flowing ideas into rigid systems. At first, a great idea emerges like a fresh wind, breaking old patterns. But over time, that very idea is distorted into a new framework, a new dogma, and instead of expanding awareness, it traps human thinking in another form of intellectual prison. A revolution in understanding becomes a belief system. A call for exploration turns into a set of rules to follow. And when this happens, philosophy is no longer a path to truth, it becomes a barrier. A wall that prevents people from seeing the reality beyond the system they have built. The fate of great ideas, and their inevitable downfall. This paradox appears throughout history. When Buddha was alive, his teachings were not a religion. They were simply a path for individuals to free themselves from suffering. But as these teachings spread, they became an institution, a religion with hierarchical structures and rigid rules, many of which contradicted the original spirit of Buddhism. Socrates left behind no written philosophy. He did not create a system of logic or rigid doctrines. He simply asked questions, shattered illusions, and forced people to think for themselves. But when Plato systematized his ideas, they became a school of thought, a structured framework that people memorized instead of questioning. Krishnamurti, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, rejected all systems of teaching. He declared that there is no fixed path to truth, that all belief systems make people passive and dependent. Yet, what happened? Many still turned his words into a new system, quoting him mechanically without grasping the deeper essence behind his teachings. It is humanity's desperate need for certainty that has killed the spirit of philosophy. Why do humans love to systematize everything? The answer lies in a fundamental psychological trait. Humans fear uncertainty. Look at daily life. We want clear principles to follow because they make us feel secure. We want a doctrine that explains everything so that we don't feel lost in existential questions. We want a clear path to enlightenment so that we don't have to navigate an unknown journey without a map. But this creates a tragic paradox. When an idea becomes a system, people stop exploring truth. They only follow pre-existing rules. They no longer question, they just memorize answers. They no longer seek, they just believe in what they are told. They no longer experience truth directly, they just repeat theories passed down by others. And when this happens, philosophy dies, leaving behind only empty doctrines. When belief becomes a chain, we often think that only the ignorant are trapped by blind faith. But in reality, even the most intelligent and educated people fall into this trap. A scientist may become so attached to existing theories that they reject new discoveries that challenge them. A philosopher may become so convinced of their ideology that they dismiss all other perspectives. A spiritual seeker may believe that their path is the only true path while rejecting all others. Why does this happen? Because people identify themselves with their beliefs. When someone believes in a doctrine, they don't just see it as an idea, they see it as a part of themselves. So when that belief is challenged, they don't just feel their argument is under attack, they feel their identity is being threatened. This is why people cling to their belief systems at all costs, even when those beliefs no longer reflect reality. How to escape this trap? The answer is not to reject knowledge, but to learn how to use it without being bound by it. Don't just learn, observe. Every theory, every doctrine, every system of thought has value. But don't let them replace your direct experience. Don't just believe, verify. Whenever you accept a belief, ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it only true within a specific context? Don't seek absolute certainty, embrace uncertainty. Truth is not a fixed formula, it is a constantly evolving awareness. And most importantly, keep your mind open, flexible, but not easily manipulated. No system is perfect. No philosophy can explain everything. No single path leads to truth. Everything is just a tool, and when we use them wisely, we can move closer to truth without getting trapped in any mental framework. But this leads to an important question. If belief systems are not the way, how can one directly access truth? In the next section, we will explore the methods used by enlightened masters, methods that do not rely on reasoning or belief but instead allow individuals to directly experience truth, free from the distortions of intellect. Only when you realize it yourself, truth becomes yours. A person may read thousands of books on meditation, but if they never sit down and practice, they will never truly understand what meditation is. A person may read hundreds of articles about silence, but if they never actually stop and feel the stillness, they will never know what silence is. Because truth cannot be expressed, it can only be realized. So, if you truly seek wisdom, don't just read, observe. Don't just listen, feel. Don't just believe, experience for yourself. Only then does truth become a part of you. Conclusion. Truth is not learned, it must be realized. We have journeyed through a deep analysis of why enlightened beings never attempt to explain the ultimate truth completely. The answer does not lie in secrecy or deliberate concealment but in the fact that anything expressed in words is merely a distorted version of reality. We have discovered that language cannot capture the true essence of reality. It is merely a system of symbols created by humans. And when we rely on it too much, we become trapped in concepts rather than direct experience. All systems of knowledge tend to turn into rigid doctrines, killing the original liberating spirit behind them. Even ideas meant to free people can become chains if turned into fixed structures. Borrowed knowledge cannot replace direct experience. You may read about meditation, but if you don't practice, you don't truly understand it. You may speak of enlightenment, but if you have never directly realized the selfless nature of existence, it is all just theory. Only direct experience leads to true wisdom. This is why enlightened masters do not provide fixed answers. Instead, they use Zen koans, silence, or nonverbal methods to force students to realize truth for themselves. Put simply, you cannot understand the sky by reading about clouds, you must look up. You cannot understand the ocean by studying maps, you must set sail yourself. So, if you truly seek truth, learn to observe instead of just thinking. Directly experience instead of just analyzing. Let go of the need for fixed answers and be open to truth as it is. Continue your journey of wisdom with The Path to Self-Realization. What we have explored here is only the surface of a deep ocean of wisdom. If these ideas awaken something within you, a curiosity, a longing to understand the world more authentically, then your journey has only just begun. On the path to self-realization, we do not impose beliefs or create rigid doctrines, we only open new perspectives, guiding you to experience and realize truth for yourself rather than passively absorbing information. If you wish to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future insights. Share your thoughts in the comments, because every conversation, every question, and every curiosity you express is a crucial part of your own self-discovery. And remember, truth is not in words, it is in how you live, how you perceive reality, and how you directly experience it. See you in the next exploration of wisdom.